From MTN, the Montana Television Network, this is Face the State.
Well, Happy New Year. Welcome to Face the State from our brand new studio here in Helena. Well, we're going to be moving between Bozeman and Helena throughout the year, which allows Mike Dennison and I, Chief Political Reporter, greater flexibility with visiting with more experts, policymakers, and thought leaders throughout the state. We hope you're as excited as we are. Well, last week, we kicked off the 65th legislative session. We have 3 new faces on the land board, lots of new legislators serving their first terms in the House and the Senate, and some big challenges facing Montana. The governor submitted his budget, which includes cuts and tax increases to address declining revenue. Here to talk about the budget, the revenue picture, infrastructure, and other exciting items, we're joined today by Senate President Scott Sayles and Minority Leader John Sesso. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us in Face the State today.
Thanks for having us.
So, governor's address, inaugural address, he comes out and basically says, look, we need to basically have bipartisanship, we need to work together. I mean, how realistic is that going to happen? I mean, that lasts, what, 3 or 4 days, and then you start fighting, right?
I don't know about that. You know, it's where you always have to start. And I think actually, in my memory, at least in recent memory, and I'm speaking somewhat for the Republican caucus as well, this is probably the most unified the Republican caucus has been for 3 or 4 sessions. And I think it's also a really good starting spot for our caucus and the Democrat caucus. John and I have known each other for, 12 years, I guess. So we've had a lot of time and opportunity to get to know each other. And, I'd like to think that the honeymoon's going to last a little bit longer than that. So at least that's where I'm coming from.
I would agree. You know, legislating and being a legislator is all about statesmanship and building and keeping relationships. I hope to rely on the history that Scott and I have to make sure the Senate runs well. And the relationships we have, we were looking around the room, and of the 50, we have a certain amount of new members, 16 new members, but 11 of those have already served and with us over these past 12 years. So we're hoping that the relationships that we've built, the governor coming in as a second term, he's been around now, he knows the lay of the land and how to build his relationships with the legislature. So we have high hopes for a very civil, statesman-like session, and we hope it lasts throughout the whole 90-day period.
David mentioned the budget. Let's talk a little bit about that. Senator Sayles, you and I have talked before, and you said you don't think this is a crisis, and I think that's what the governor has said too, but some members of your party seem to be acting like it is one. They're already going to vote to cut another $50 million from the starting point. What's your view of how bad it is and whether that's an appropriate action?
Well, on a budget this size, I don't think a couple $100 million is a crisis. A crisis would be if we were $500 million short or something along those lines. So, yeah, it's definitely, we have a declining revenue situation. We're going to have to sharpen our pencils, and it's the Republicans' caucus that it's our intent to pass a well-crafted, meaningful budget that lives within our means, just like the family does or any other business. And we'd like to do it without any revenue enhancements, as the governor likes to say. I just call them tax increases. But that would be our goal. And then on top of that, and I've talked at length with the minority leader and other members of my leadership team, we have a lot of things coming on down from the federal level potentially with the repeal of Obamacare potentially and a stimulus of some sort that could deal with infrastructure from the Trump administration. So I think it would be prudent if we could save a few days, and that's my plan. We're going to try to run a real streamlined, efficient, timely fashion, in a timely fashion, and get out maybe a few days early, possibly as much as 8 or 10 days. So, yeah, there's going to. I don't think there's a lot of inclination on our side that we want to raise taxes. So that means we're going to have to cut the budget, and it's always better to start on a little lower end and work your way up than vice versa. So I think that was just the intent, is that, and we don't really know how far the revenue is going to decline over the next couple of months.
Now, is that your view, Senator Sesso, in terms of the significance of that first move that happened last week, saying we're going to cut another $50 million from the starting point in the budget?
It's a conservative move. I would concur that it's not a crisis situation. The good news is we're still in the black, as among many states that rely on natural resources. We have had a dip. in our revenues, but at the same time, we have confidence in our state. We have confidence that these revenues are cyclical, whether it's mining or timber or ag prices. These are going to come back and they will return the revenues to current levels. But at the same time, it has given us a chance to really have to tighten our belt. I mean, it's not going to be pretty in the sense that in this 2-year period that we're working on now, we've got to make some cuts. Of course, the $50 million extra is in recognition of the reality that it might be difficult to pass any increases in taxes. And so in light of that, and if the budget relies on tax enhancements, revenue enhancements, something's got to give. And so it's a balancing act. This is just day 4. The starting point is very important because as the subcommittees start their work tomorrow and Monday, they're going to be sitting in their rooms for over a month trying to craft this very detailed and immense budget. It's $2 billion per year, $4 billion in general funds per biennia. So that, it's got to be done right. So they're starting from the premise that we've got to cut more because we're not going to be raising any more money. I think the important thing you got to focus on is that we're starting from a position of strength. Montana is in the black, has been in the black, has been a strong fiscal steward both through legislative action and the leadership of the governor. And I think we'll get this done like we always do.
I mean, you're acknowledging, Senator Sesso, that there are going to probably have to be some cuts, and the governor's acknowledging in his budget. So what is the real prospect, for example, that pre-K is actually going to get funded in this budget? I mean, he's calling for cuts, at the same time calling for another big new program. Is that realistic?
Well, it's like I said, it's a $4 billion number. The amount of cuts are in the $75 to $100 million range. We want to concentrate on the fact, small steps, and we believe that pre-K is a good investment for Montana. It actually pays off because the data shows that if we can give our kids a head start and they can get to good education early in their lives, they have a much better chance to graduate from high school and save the state money in the context of social services and that other end of the spectrum. We believe in that concept. To whatever extent we can get started in the 18-19 biennium, the better. And everything's on the table to the extent that we can find cuts in areas that don't hurt families, that don't hurt people, but then can turn around and help families and help people. I think that's the balance we're looking for. So out of the gate, there's some resistance, obviously, to the idea of a new program in a budget cut year. But at the end, perhaps we'll find the resources to get at least started down the path of pre-kindergarten education.
Senator Sayles, let's go back to this point about the pre-K program, and if you actually look at working families, one of the biggest expenses they have, and I know this from personal experience, after your mortgage is your daycare costs. Wouldn't this be a smart program to help working families and actually put money in the pocket of working families that they can then inject into the economy?
Well, it's more complex than that, and I'll just think of it more of like on a family budget or a business. If you're in a declining revenue situation like you mentioned before, you don't start something new. I mean, you're going to take care of existing business. And one of those things is, I hate to even bring it up, but I will, is that the fact that a whole pile of different highway projects are on the chopping block. And these are families, too, that have kids that need to be fed and clothed and attend school and the like. And so we think that we should probably fund existing programs like state highways that benefit a large cross-section of the citizenry of Montana before we start looking at something else that we haven't done in the past. So we have a bill that is going to hit come out of the chute here pretty quick that basically is going to transfer the money that's in the governor's budget for pre-K, and we're going to fund these necessary highway projects. They have a big highway match from the federal government, I'd add. I think it's 87 to 13. and so that we can get those projects going in this spring so that we don't have a bunch of construction companies that have to lay off workers and that are going to help, hinder those families. You could look at it a lot of different ways. I can find different studies that say that most pre-K type things by the 3rd or 4th or 5th grade, there's very little difference between individuals that either have an opportunity for that in terms of what John was talking about is giving a jump start to these students. You can find studies that say that those type of projects help in the short term, but in the long term, that value actually disappears. And also, what about the people that are currently involved in the daycare that currently are providing that? I mean, that would be competition once again from the public sector with the private sector. So, I mean, you could look at it 2 or 3 different ways, whether or not this is a good idea. We're not going to I'm going to flat out say that I don't know of any support within the Republican caucus to start a new program. So, I think it's going to be a very tough sell.
Hey, Senator Sales, you mentioned the highway money and playing off the education money. To fund those highway projects, we're going to have to find money this biennium, aren't we?
It's just a short-term fix.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
So it's
It
really
isn't
not
a
related
long-term fix. We need to look at some
preschool.
different things like what is the MDOT, the Montana Department of Transportation, doing with their existing budget. I saw a graph the other day that one of my aides brought in that showed how much we're spending on personal services, what we pay people, benefits, vacation, retirement. About 17 years ago, it was around $77 million. It's going to be $162 million for 17. That's a substantial increase. Every dollar we pay in that arena is one less dollar that we can, put toward paving a road or putting up a guardrail or building a bridge or all those necessary functions. So there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, and we're going to take a look at are we really getting really good bang for the taxpayers' buck on highway transportation dollars, or are we spending a lot on overhead that could potentially go to actually job creation and getting the roads built?
Well, but now both of you, though, have talked about taxes, saying there's not going to be any tax increases, or you don't think they're going to be. A question I have for you, Senator Sales, I mean, is there nothing for which Republicans would agree to any tax increase? Not roads or public schools or the youth system or infrastructure? I mean, nothing?
Well, I'm not speaking for the caucus when it comes to fuel tax. There's going to be at least one proposal and probably several that deal with that this session. We're not taking a caucus position on that. I'm not going to vote for an increase in the fuel tax. But I think there is some interest in that from members within my own caucus. So there's going to be a robust debate. In fact, it's a Republican in the House that I hear that's sponsoring the bill, a 10-cent increase in the road tax. Or the fuel tax. So anyway, I think that we're going to have a robust debate on that subject. And I think quite possibly, I'd be surprised that if there isn't some sort of fuel tax increase. We're not, or never will, take a position that we're going to tell our caucus members what they can or cannot do. But I think there'll probably be a little bit of movement in that area, but I don't think that we're going to try to soak the rich. I don't think we're going to put a sales tax on medical marijuana. I don't think we're going to do these other type of tax increases that the governor has in his budget. I just don't think that's going to happen. I haven't heard any interest from my caucus members.
I hear this a lot, Senator Sesso, and I don't disagree that the analogy is somewhat apt, that when you're facing a budget, that one of the things you look at is as like a household you cut. But isn't it true at the same time that households have another option, which is that they go get a second job or they go get a better job, it gets people more money? I never hear the revenue side talked about. I always hear cuts, cuts, cuts. Why is it so bad to raise taxes?
Well, it's just unpopular, for one thing, and it's tough to get it over the finish line. I mean, people just don't want more of their paychecks being eaten up by taxes, and I think that it's just difficult. But at the same time, there are taxes that people pay, user taxes, taxes on cigarettes, tax on alcohol, tax on the things that are not necessities, basic necessities of life. There is also the fairness question with respect to our income tax. When a millionaire is paying the same tax rate as a food service worker, something's got to give in that regard. There is this age-old debate on the ability to pay, and shouldn't the more well-off contribute more. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they would make that point, that they do spend more, not by percentage, but by contributions of their earnings to the tax share, the tax burden. But we think that there's room. There's room for revenue enhancements when times are tough, so that you don't have to cut the budget and essential services that really start to hurt working families and the people of Montana who are working hard, even with 2 jobs, trying to make ends meet. So I think that we should have just as thorough a conversation about revenue enhancements as we do about what we're going to cut out of the budget to make it balance.
Let's talk a little bit about the infrastructure bills or issue. And Senator Sesso, we're constantly talking about infrastructure, an infrastructure bill, but at the same time, we've always funded lots of things like the resource grants and the TSEP and things like that that routinely get approved. What are we actually talking about? How does the big infrastructure bill differ from these routinely accepted measures? What's going to be in it?
Well, it's about half and half. As you say, the Treasury State Endowment Program, the Resource Indemnity Trust Program, the Long-Range Building Programs. These programs generally over the last, in my time, over the last 15, 20 years, these generate approximately $80 to $100 million in projects that serve our communities. Those will continue. We're going to talk a little bit about whether we're doing them in cash or we're doing them in bonding, but in fact, those projects will continue. I think what the public has asked for and what we're shooting for, I think in a bipartisan way, is to make a greater investment than the status quo. Do 2 things. Bond for some projects that have been on the drawing board for several years, projects that have been long overdue, and then secondly, try to come up with a more consistent funding source beyond the ones that you speak of that we've been dealing with for the last several, 10 biennia, so that we can count on a steady investment in our infrastructure on behalf of the cities and towns and our state in the long term. Me personally, I believe that state buildings, investments in state buildings are part of that. Of course, I am very, very interested in advancing the Veterans Home. It has been on the drawing board for 6 years now. It's in Southwest Montana. It belongs there to balance out where our other 2 veterans homes are. That's a project, that's an investment in our veterans. It's an investment in people who have made their sacrifices, and we owe it to them. Investments on university campuses. If our forefathers had not made strong investments in the universities that we now enjoy and that our children enjoy, we would be set behind our competitors around us. So I believe that investments in our university buildings is a good thing. And as far as the Historical Society, again, I think that this can be a real important investment for our state, and we're going to try to get those over the finish line this year. So there's going to be a mix of the projects that usually get done, and then we're going to bond for hopefully in the $100 million range to get more water and sewer projects out there, get more communities served, more road projects, also address the schools. The maintenance of schools and school structures is lagging behind. We got to put some investment in that area. So I think that the A to Z approach to funding all critical infrastructure is the way to go.
But the speaker says that Romney Hall and the Historical Society new building don't count as infrastructure. Senator Sayles, do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I would say they're not critical. If we're going to talk about infrastructure, especially if you're going to borrow the money, I think it needs to be essential. It needs to be critical. If you're going to put the taxpayers on the hook like that for bonding, and a smaller subset of the entire population enjoys those type of things. So whereas the roads and sewer and water and those type of projects, they affect the business community, they affect the residential community, they affect most citizens. We all enjoy those type of things and rely on them on a daily basis. So I think there's a difference between essential and critical, and quite possibly I don't think new buildings, in my viewpoint, rise to that level that they would be called that. Especially, we have a building for the Historical Society. We have plenty of buildings down at MSU. They're continuing to get by. They're continuing to build new buildings as they see fit. So there's lots of construction still going on in that environment. So, and the other thing to consider is the construction of a building is just a small component over the life of what it costs to maintain and operate that building, something like 15%. So before we build new buildings, we need to really make sure that they truly are critical, they truly are essential. And the other thing is I just want to bring up to the viewers' attention is that we've had a lot of money for a long period of time. If you go back a couple bienniums, we were up there around $500 million worth of surplus. If you go all the way back to 07 session, we had $1.2 billion worth of surplus. We had the Obama administration gave us $1 billion worth of stimulus money that was supposed to be for shovel-ready projects. And unfortunately, we chose to do something, and that was grow government. We grew government with all that money instead of using a lot of it to do some of these quote-unquote essential and critical projects. So when you talked a little bit with John about why are we cutting, well, government's doubled in size since I've been there in the last 14 years. The private sector hasn't. So I think that we really do need to be good stewards, live within our means, and really take a real hard critical look at this infrastructure if we're going to end up borrowing the money and make sure it's something that we really, really need.
Senator Sesso, you're a big proponent of Romney Hall, the Veterans Home, and the Historical Society building, but how do you address the argument that to rural Montanans that these projects don't necessarily serve them, number one, and how do you address the second part of the argument, which is the Republicans, frankly, shellacked you in the last election. Shouldn't the Republicans just basically get what they want in terms of infrastructure?
Well, first of all, I think we got to change this narrative about going into debt. These are investments in our future. These are investments in our state. I have a higher confidence that our state is going to be able to afford these things than perhaps some others. As far as the rural-urban divide, I'm not going to go there in terms of pitting one against the other. In my town, in Butte, we've spent $100 million in infrastructure, paid for by ratepayers in Butte, okay? So because we want to support the Veterans Home now and make sure that gets over the finish line, that's our critical need. It's not like our city has not paid its fair share. So to the rural voter, to the rural community who thinks that the state needs to pay for their infrastructure, and why should they then contribute to some of the infrastructure that's in the urban areas, I think that's a false argument. That's a false split in the discussion, because somebody's infrastructure in a rural area is critical. It's not as critical because it's already been paid for by the citizens in the urban area. So if I'm in an urban area and I have the privilege and the benefit of a university system in my area, I want to make sure that that university system can survive to help the citizens in that community who are paying the higher rates for their water and sewer. So everybody has needs, and in my case, the construction of buildings in urban areas is just as critical as water and sewer systems. It's not like I don't have water and sewer systems and rates that I have to pay in Butte, but it cuts both ways.
And we should point out it takes 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate to get a bonding bill passed, so there's going to have to be some compromises there. Now we talked about the big issues, the obvious issues, budget, infrastructure, and taxes. Senator Sales, I'm just wondering what's an issue that we're not talking about that's kind of a sleeper issue we see out there that could be something significant?
Well, I don't know if it's going to rear its ugly head, but something that's really significant is public employees' retirement. I know that 4 years ago we had a special committee on that. I'm still concerned with that issue. What really masks that problem is this unusually high rate of return that we have in there at 7.75% that we're going to have indefinitely, or I should say in perpetuity. That makes it look like it. We just got the numbers back a month or so ago that the last 10 years it was less than 5%. If you calculate that in there instead of this more robust 7.75%, we've got a potential train like a lot of other states in our retirement. So when we talk about borrowing more money, it scares me because we do have this 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is TRS and PERS that I claim, and are really truly underfunded. And at some point, the taxpayer is going to be on the hook for that as well. So I don't know if that's going to get much airtime. It'll probably depend on how bad, if the stock market continues on this unprecedented gain since Trump's been elected, or if we see a hit to it over this year. But that to me is something that's lurking out there. It may not rear its ugly head in this session, but it's something that we're going to have to address down the road.
What about you, Senator Stesso? Is there something out there that you think is going to be a big deal that not a lot of attention is being paid to at this point?
Well, first of all, I have a much different view of the solvency of the retirement systems. I think that they're going well. The last report I got in September and even in December was that we had a very good year. They're very solvent, and so much so that we've been able to actually afford the small increase for the retirees. I think one of the bigger things on my horizon is the potential impacts of federal action on our state. We are dependent, much to Senator Sale's chagrin, on federal dollars, and we are a receiver of federal dollars as opposed to a giver in terms of per capita. And so things are going to be different. You know, the changes that were made in '09 after President Obama was elected, I think are going to be similar in terms of the nature of the changes. He has indicated some changes in the offing specifically with respect to healthcare systems. So we have to be on our toes to see what happens there and how it affects Montana. Also federal highway funding, federal funding for a plethora of Montana programs. We have to watch carefully because at the end of the day, it's probably going to be pretty true that less dollars are going to be coming to Montana, and we have to be prepared for that reality.
Looking at we sat down, Mike and I did before the show, and we kind of looked at all the different bills that are, in the hopper. What are the top three priorities? I mean, obviously, the budget is the most important thing, yes. But what are your three top priorities in this session outside of the budget, outside of infrastructure? Senator Sales.
Well, really, I'm focusing just like a laser on trying to get us through the session in a timely and efficient manner so that we can save some days. And I mentioned that right up front because I honestly think that there's a very high probability over the next 20 months after we adjourn that we're going to have to come back and do something on federal money that in the form of some stimulus for infrastructure and something in the area of healthcare, depending on what they do at the national level. So that's my priority. As the President of the Senate, the presiding officer, there's really very little that you have in charge of other than the trains need to run on time and we need to get our work done in an efficient manner. So that's one of the things I'm really focused on. And probably the second thing is that that we maintain a good working relationship and a good level playing field and decorum within the Senate, and that that the people feel like that they've had a fair and level playing field in terms of how their bills are treated and the like. And that's just the job in terms of being president as the presiding officer.
Could cut you off at two. Give me two quick ones because we got about less than a minute.
Energy policy as it relates to the future of Colstrip. Very important to my district. A couple of major employers that rely on that power. I think we've got to do some good things for the workers at Colstrip, make sure that they're not left whole in the bag as coal takes new directions in our state. And I think healthcare policy, whereas we improved access to healthcare in the 2015 session, now we got to do something about the cost of healthcare and make sure we can do all we can to get it going in the right direction.
So we have a lot of priorities coming up. Of course, a lot's going to depend on the federal government. Thanks for joining us today on Face the State. I'm Dave Parker with Mike Dennison. Gentlemen, thank you.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.